stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Commissioner Zuber, would you call the roll and see who's here?
Sure. I do not see Commissioner Charia. Commissioner Eggenberger.
Yes.
All right. Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Commissioner Okan.
Here.
Commissioner Singh.
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins.
Here.
Commissioner Weber. Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
Present.
Right.
All right, we last met on October 3rd. We have minutes of that meeting before us. Do I hear a motion to accept the minutes of October 3rd's meeting?
So moved.
All right, got a motion by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Weber. Any further discussion? Voice vote, all in favor of accepting those minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, moving right along. We have an agenda tonight, one public hearing, and we're going to deal with some amendments to our, what do you call it? Our ordinances, our zoning ordinances. Any late additions from staff? Anything you want to add
Nothing new to add.
from the commission? No? Hearing none, seeing none, do I hear a motion to accept the agenda as listed?
So moved.
All right, we've got a motion by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Weber. Voice vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are rolling. Okay, so, any additional communications from the public to staff?
Not that we've received. We have a public hearing this evening. We're not aware of any public comments that have been received before the hearing.
Okay, all right. So, having heard that and whatnot, let's move right along to that public hearing that we have before us. It is the Markham Laura, yes, where we're considering rezoning. This property, which is located on the south side of Lotsford Road, east of Lots Road, the proposed use is a single-family residential, and we are actually discussing removing the corporate park overlay district from that parcel. Patrick, could you give us more detail?
Sure, thank you. The subject property is located on the south side of Lotsford Road, which is east of Lots Road. And both the Lotsford roads, there's a Lotsford Road that's east of Lots Road, and then there's a separate Lotsford Road that's west of Lots Road. And both of those roads are predominantly single-family detached residential streets. And they're both dead-end streets. And they are also part of the Corporate Park Overlay District, which is a predominantly commercial district, mostly commercial and some mixed use. There are some limited provisions in the Corporate Park Overlay District for single-family residential. Among them are that existing single-family residential structures are allowed to continue in the Corporate Park Overlay District, but it doesn't allow for new detached single-family residential. It does allow for some multifamily in some areas of the overlay district, as well as some mixed use with a residential component. The reason is the Corporate Park Overlay District, it was envisioned as being predominantly commercial, office park, large corporate campuses, and it's been reduced in size over time. There are some areas of the Corporate Park Overlay District that are north of Ford Road that have been reduced, going much farther south of Warren, that have been taken out of the Corporate Park Overlay District. As well as there have been some areas south of Ford that have been taken out of the district as well. One that comes to mind is on the east side of Lots Road, there's the Wellington on the Willow Tremont Place, which I think some or most of the planning commissioners have reviewed, I think maybe a year and a half ago. And that was conditionally rezoned out of the Corporate Park Overlay District to allow for an attached single-family residential, almost like townhouse-style, apartment-style buildings. So over time, the Corporate Park Overlay District has been reduced. Nothing really has been removed off of the Lotsford roads. And I think some of the thought around a long time was that as Lots Road was paved, there would be more demand for commercial uses along Lots Road, and that hasn't happened, particularly in this area. Even though Lots Road has been paved, it's been widened, it has sidewalks, there is not an increased demand for commercial in this area. It's remained as single-family residential, and there's more demand to continue that use as single-family residential, and in the case of the applicant, to construct a new single-family residence on what is currently a vacant parcel. So that's the start of the proposal from the applicant's standpoint. So the appropriate procedure for the applicant that we advised them early in the process was that because the corporate park overlay doesn't allow single-family detached residential, the appropriate application would be to apply to rezone the property, to remove the corporate park overlay district from the property, and therefore using the existing underlying zoning district of R2, which is how the area was originally developed several years ago. So if the corporate park overlay district is removed and there's a single-family detached structure, residence built on it, then it would be consistent with the surrounding areas. It's consistent with the character of the area, the built environment. And we've gone through the zoning ordinance and we've reviewed all of the 10 criteria of section 27.06D4. And I won't go through each and every one of them, but I listed a few of them in the introduction to the case. Another item that I do want to note is that the master plan does recommend the eventual removal of the corporate park overlay and substituting the central business district in those areas of the corporate park overlay. There have been attempts in the past to repeal the entire corporate park overlay district, and that's never been carried through. It's something that we're going to look at in more detail in 2023, particularly with the pending updates to the master plan. But in the meantime, we do expect that there may be applications removing certain properties from the corporate park overlay. If something like this were to happen on Ford Road, we may take more of a cautious approach and a more of a wait-and-see approach where something in that area may not yet be ripe because there are many areas there that are zoned corporate park overlay, and they were done for very specific reasons in terms of limiting the types and amounts of commercial that go in those areas. But for some of the areas off of the main Ford Road, especially as far south as the Lotsford roads, those are predominantly residential areas that I think would be the easiest ones to make the case of taking the corporate park overlay district away sometime in the near future. So sometime in 2023, we may look for limiting the corporate park overlay district even more and recommending rezoning additional properties in this particular area out of the corporate park overlay, especially those ones that are on Lotsford Road and have established parcels where somebody may want to build a house on an existing parcel. But we're not quite there yet. So in the meantime, applicants there can apply to have the property rezoned like the subject applicant has in this case. So for the reasons in our staff report and the ones that I note, staff's recommendation is to recommend approval of the request to rezone the subject parcel from R2 and corporate park overlay to the R2 district without the corporate park overlay district, as the proposal meets the standards of the zoning ordinance as stated in our staff report. That concludes our report, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. So this is a public hearing. So do I hear a motion to open it as such?
So moved.
Support.
Did everyone support that?
I did not.
I feel so supported.
Okay, we've got a motion by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Foster to open the public hearing. Voice vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Is the project representative here? Would you care to come on up to the podium and make any additions to what Patrick has said?
Just briefly, I do have some packets here that I'd like to hand out, and is it okay if I hand them to Commissioner?
That would be fine.
And if that would be acceptable?
Very, very timely.
First of all, just a little bit of backdrop. I wanted to thank Mr. Sloan. I spoke to him briefly on the phone, I think on one or two occasions preparing this application. But my office, for the record, Dominic Hamden, 827 Barnswallow Lane, Milan, Michigan, 48160. I spoke to Patrick on one or two occasions, but we were dealing with Ms. Ismet Khan primarily, and I have a little bit of work with the city of Milan. I served on Milan's as mayor for 4 years, and then I served as city council for 8. I know how important support staff is, and I just wanted to let you know that Ms. Khan was absolutely a delight to work with. She was very pleasant. She was responsive. And when either myself or Ms. Markham shot an email over to her, we usually got a response back within a day. And so she made it very easy for us. And so I just wanted to let you know that in case Mr. Sloan sees her or in the event that you have an opportunity to talk to her. I've known Ms. Markham for several years now. We've given you several pieces of information. The first piece of paper that you have in front of you is an actual picture of the home, as well as the builder's information as well. And so you can get an idea of the home that Ms. Markham is looking at constructing. We've also given you some of her preliminary permit applications, including her approvals for well and septic. We've also given you her preliminary credit approval, which I believe gave her a credit approval of up to $1 million to construct this home. She's a business owner in the local area, and I believe resides within or works within 2 miles of this parcel. And so this is kind of her dream home and her opportunity to kind of make Canton Township her home, at least for the foreseeable future. And so I'm asking that you simply approve the recommendation that Mr. Sloan has given to you, and Ms. Markham is here, as well as her friend, Mr. Weir. So do you have any questions for us?
Thank you very much for being here, and if we do, please
Let me know.
be available.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. All right, with that said, let's go to the audience right away, and if there's any public comment or anything from the audience that you'd like to say, now is the time to do that. The public hearing has opened. Nobody?
Mr. Chairman, I move to close the public hearing.
Support. Again.
Okay, we've got a motion to close the public hearing by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Singh. Voice vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll go right to the commission, and we're going to start with Commissioner Singh. Did you have any comments, questions, or concerns from this project
No
or this
questions.
idea? Okay, and Commissioner Foster?
I don't have any questions.
Commissioner Weber?
I have a question, not really about the project itself, but just curious, what are the boundaries of the overlay, Patrick?
I will bring up the zoning map here. And there we go. So it's in this, well, we have a very colorful zoning map. We have a lot of different districts. So in addition to colors, we also have hashing. It's like the purple cross hatching, and it goes as far south as the ITC lines. So a little bit south of this property, and the south side of this property is the ITC lines, and the ITC corridor itself is the southern boundary of this. And it goes all the way from the township's eastern boundary to about 275. And then it runs north, and the Wellington and the Willow / Tremont Place project, that's this R6 area here that's not hatched in. And then this, what is that? No, it's not an octagon. But anyway, the red marker there is an indication that it's a conditional rezoning. And then the corporate park overlay, it runs north of Ford Road. So going east to west, the Walmart, the Sam's Club, that's in the corporate park overlay. Some of the single-family homes and detached homes and lots along the north side of Lots Road are in the overlay. The apartment complex is in the overlay, as well as the commercial properties along Ford Road, like the tile shop and that area there, and some vacant property there. And I'll just leave that up there.
The homes that are, say, north of Ford Road on lots, they're non-conforming uses?
So you mean north side of, let me see.
North of Ford Road.
Yeah, so north of Ford Road, these lots here along lots north of Ford, those are in the corporate park overlay. So if it's an existing home, it can continue as a residence, but new single-family residences are not allowed in the district. And for the owners that I've talked to before, they seem to like living there and like continuing to live there. So that'll be a spot that we look at closely when we look at the master plan to see if that's one we want to take out. What's interesting there is those are zoned, the underlying zoning is multifamily residential. So with the master plan and with the paving of Lots Road and allow those improvements, it's a good time to ask, do we want to still have multifamily residential, or are we content with single-family detached residential there?
Township's feeling is that this area where Mrs. Markham's property is, the chances of that ever getting developed commercial, that view is that window closing. Is kind of the viewpoint at this point.
Yeah, I haven't received any, I would consider significant inquiries from any commercial developers that are looking to assemble properties to do things. With a lot of the established single-family residences, it's cost prohibitive for anyone to assemble them. Most of the inquiries that we get on the south side of the district in the underlying R2 area are people that want to eventually do single-family detached, and they ask about, hey, this is a property that's for sale, it's vacant, what can I do with it? I want to build a home, and then we tell them the same thing we tell everybody, and sometimes they get purchased and they wait, and sometimes they don't. But the inquiries that we get along Lotsford Road and then the area just north of that is mostly single-family residential inquiries.
This property's been really interesting to me because having been on the planning commission, the corporate park overlay was there in the beginning for me, and it was always understood to be kind of reserved as an area where we'd have a large project that would benefit Canton in the way of someone coming in, putting in hotels and big shopping center and the whole 9 yards. And as you can see, it has remained what it is. So my question would be, and this would be one for the planning of the master plan, which is going to happen in this coming year. Is that a necessary look anymore? This is in the southern part of that district, so there's still, quite a bit of it left. But my question would be trending, will there be other residential inquiries in the future, you think, that, like this one, would cause for a request to remove the overlay district?
I think there are. Anecdotally, hearing from either current owners or prospective owners of their desire in the future to do a single-family detached home on the lot. And I think part of that is there aren't many vacant single-family lots nearby Ford Road or the interchange or amenities like that. So there are people that want to find a lot there and build a house.
Well, I guess what I would get at, it would be from a planning standpoint, is it time to just dissolve the corporate park overlay? Or do we leave it intact because you can still do something should that offer arise? And I think when you mentioned, I believe, the Wellington project, wasn't that done as a PDD when they came before us?
That's correct.
So that negated in and of itself the corporate park overlay, because the zoning was there, but the PDD doesn't have to go along with that zoning necessarily. So we'd still have that as an option too. If let's say a developer wanted to come in with this in mind and say, hey, we can put some R2 homes in there on a grand scale, they'd be able to do it, or would we have to go through this process with each and every parcel?
They could come in with a PDD. Usually, If they did, it probably wouldn't be for one home or for a small project. They would want a project that's big enough. They could go the PDD route if they wanted to. I think what we may find in the coming months is that the corporate park overlay is, especially in the area that has this R2, and the R2 district, it's outlined in red here. It's predominantly detached, single-family residential. I think if we were looking at the corporate park overlay, and if it was an incremental approach, I think the first area to be removed would be this R2 area, just because it's very established as R2. It's continued as R2 through the paving of Lots Road, and it's reflective of the inquiries that we get in terms of what people want to do there, because people want to build similar to what it already looks like around them.
With that in mind, I have no objection to this, but I just wanted to get the feeling, like Commissioner Weber, where are we headed? And we really don't know at this point without the master plan being updated and, thought through and all that kind of stuff. But I'd have no objection to this because it's on the southern part of that, of the corporate park overlay. So that area then could continue to change as it will if they wanted to. So, Commissioner Zuber?
I have no problems with this.
Commissioner Eggenberg?
No, it's okay, I'm taking both. I have no problem.
Commissioner Okon?
My drink.
I'm good, thank you.
And Commissioner Watkins?
Yeah, real good with this project. Just a quick question, Patrick. I thought I heard you mention with the corporate park overlay, there could be an opportunity to flip it back to CBD, Central Business District. What would be the effects of being able to do that in this area, notwithstanding any removal of the corporate park overlay? Thanks so much.
Sure, yeah, that's a really good question, because our, on the west side of Ford Road, we have our Central Business District overlay, and there's the single hatching along the west side, west of I-275 along Ford Road. And it mostly covers commercial areas. There are some areas that are non-commercial that it covers. And the Central Business District overlay, it has use provisions. It doesn't have the same use provisions to the extent that the corporate park overlay does, because in the corporate park overlay, virtually every use is a special land use. So whenever there's a new use established in the corporate park overlay, they go through the special land use process. And one of the recommendations of the master plan was that the Central Business District be extended eastward along Ford Road. And then we would probably take a look at that time, if we go ahead with it, to see what areas are appropriate to cover with the Central Business District. Because in addition to its uses in the Central Business District, it also has provisions for landscaping, for those decorative walls at the corners, street lights, some of the decorative street lights in the Central Business District. So it's got a different look and feel to it. And one of the questions that we would grapple with at that time is, if we extend the Central Business District and we want this area east of 275 to look like it, we definitely would want to continue along Ford Road. It's just a matter of how far north and south on Lots Road we would want to continue that.
Patrick, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything else from the commission that popped up whenever anybody else was speaking? Nothing?
I would like to make a motion, but before I do, I'd really like to say, Patrick, I'd like to hear you say corporate park overlay in Central Business District several more times, just because it's fun to hear that.
Well, once the recording
5
comes
times
out, you
fast.
can listen to it as many times as you want.
You said that. You said corporate park overlay many times in your presentation.
I think we call it CPOD in the report. I don't know if I can.
You could have abbreviated.
I'm going to start using that.
Yeah, why
CPOD?
why
Okay.
don't we always call it CPOD?
I'll say CPOD.
Oh, well, I'm going to make a motion, and I'm going to use that. I move to recommend approval of the request to rezone parcel number 052-99-0033-000, which is also known as 39609 Lotsford Road, from R2 Single Family Residential and CPOD District. CPOD, that would be no district. That means district. To R2 Single Family Residential without the CPOD, as the proposal meets the standards of section 27.06 D4 of the zoning ordinance as stated in the staff report.
Support.
Okay, we've got a motion by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner, I believe it was Okan. Any further discussions on this motion? Hearing none, seeing none. Commissioner Zuber, please call the vote.
Sure, Commissioner Eggenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Okan.
Yes.
Commissioner Singh,
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Weber,
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
That's a yes from me. So this then proceeds to the trustees, for their consideration of this. Good luck to you. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Thank you. Yeah, and good luck.
Oh, wait. There we go. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, no,
No. Did he say the S word?
I think he did. I'm glad he said that after we
Boy, I tell you
voted.
what, wouldn't have been so favorable saying that S word like that. All right, our second agenda item of the evening. We're going to, we have to meet in 2023, right? As a planning commission? And the planning staff has put together a series of dates for us. Some of them moving from the first Monday of the month because of various holidays. Everybody had a chance to look over those dates? Objections or
No.
anything that pops out?
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend approval of the 2023 Planning Commission meeting schedule at 7 PM on the following dates: January 9th, February 6th, March 6th, April 3rd, May 1st, June 5th, July 10th, August 7th, September 11th, October 2nd, November 6th, and December 4th, during which we might discuss C-Pods.
We will, now that you put that in the motion, right? That's in the motion.
All right, we've got a motion by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Weber. Any further discussion on the motion?
No.
That one, Commissioner Zuber, would you call the vote, please?
Sure. Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Commissioner Okan?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I do have a yes, but that August 7th date is my birthday, and I cannot guarantee that I will be here that day, so.
What if we promise to bring you a cake?
Oh, we'll make it
But you
festive.
get a yes.
Noted. Commissioner Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
That's a yes from me, even though I don't know if all of you are aware of this, I will not be with you on those dates, as I am going to be moving to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I will not be on the Planning Commission after December's meeting. But
won't be the same without
good
you.
luck to you all. You're going to have some exciting projects, I'm sure, coming before you. Okay, our third agenda item is the zoning ordinance text amendment, where we're going to deal with solar energy issues. Patrick, could you give us some details on this? What are we doing?
Sure, thank you. Currently, the township has had a lot of applications for solar energy systems on residential property, mostly on the rooftops of single-family homes. And the township doesn't have any solar energy regulations in the zoning ordinance that deals with placement and location and similar types of provisions. And so historically, what the township had done is treated solar energy systems like rooftop mechanical equipment, which doesn't really fit. So in years past, they've been regulated as only on the rear side of the house and not visible from an adjacent property or the road right away. Very restrictive, that made it almost impossible to do a rooftop system in conformance with that interpretation of being rooftop mechanical equipment. A few months ago, we had modified that interpretation. The zoning ordinance allows for limited types of interpretation based on certain rules. And so we were able to interpret them as being similar enough to what we have. We do have provisions for wind energy systems, rooftop wind energy systems, although they're rare to come by because we don't really get the amount of wind that would generate a substantial amount of electricity for a home. But we use the wind energy systems to apply those to, if it was solar panels, then it would still have to be on either the rear side of the house or not visible from a road right-of-way. It's a little less restrictive than regulating it as rooftop mechanical, but it's by no means a long-term solution. It's just a way for, in the interim, to try to have an interpretation. So for those where it works out, great, and we can have our building division issue permits for those. But for those where it doesn't, and we have several applicants that have come into the building division wanting to do rooftop solar systems, some of those have just been delayed or otherwise deferred. And so many communities across the state have solar energy regulations, and by this point in time, a lot of them are fairly mainstream, and there are all sorts of ordinances out there that would be considered model ordinances or boilerplate types of ordinances where we've been, as a state, we've been regulating rooftop solar energy systems for probably at least the last 15 years is when it really became big, where it was a benefit in terms of cost benefit to do systems, probably in the mid-2000s is when they started to become more predominant. So a number of communities, probably hundreds of communities across the state, have implemented solar energy regulations into their zoning ordinances. So the ones before you this evening, some of it is copied and taken from best practices, but it's been tweaked to kind of fit what we would see as staff and to fit some of the things that we're looking for to make it more explicit, more predictable. So we have a number of definitions that we're including there just to make sure a lot of the bases are covered. The other thing I'll say about solar energy regulations is that they go across a very wide spectrum. So some communities have regulated solar energy farms, those large utility solar energy farms, and those are not included in these regulations. It's not that we're against them or that we can't have them. I think they're a great idea in the appropriate place. As staff, we're just looking at, in the interest of time, what kind of regulations would be the lower hanging fruit where we may be able to get something approved in the coming months if it was generally agreed upon between the Planning Commission and the board, so that it addressed the main issue of homeowners wanting to put solar energy systems on their roofs. So what we've proposed is a relatively scaled down ordinance compared to what a lot of communities in the state have. And there's one part that deals with rooftop systems and another part that deals with the accessory ground-mounted systems that we sometimes see in the backyards of people. But those are pretty rare because on a rooftop, you're going to get better solar exposure and, it's not taking up part of your yard. It's up there, and once it's installed, it just kind of stays there with not a whole lot of maintenance. So those are the main provisions that we have there. We have some other provisions for battery storage and removal, which are fairly standard in most other ordinances statewide. So if they're recommended for adoption, they would, what we would do is we would set a public hearing, probably at the January meeting, because the December meeting is only in 3 weeks, so we wouldn't be able to have a public hearing notice, but we'd be looking at probably the January meeting. So if our recommendation is to set a public hearing for the proposed amendments, and if we wanted more discussion, we could have discussion at the December meeting and still have time to have a public hearing on the January meeting. So I'll stop there with the staff comments and take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, so what we are about tonight is to discuss some of the detail in the amendments, correct?
Correct.
Well, with that said, let's start with Commissioner Watkins.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions at all with regard to the current proposed regulations. I will say that I think I need to learn a little bit more about the types of systems that would be installed based upon what we're regulating, meaning looks like there's a tilt height. Looks like there's an opportunity for some to be mechanized in some way. Notwithstanding what's been proposed and what I've read, I have no objections, but I think there's still a little bit of a learning curve in terms of understanding exactly what will happen now and what will happen in the future as it relates to solar installs on top of residential and or commercial. And I assume that this covers commercial as well. So that's going to be my comment.
I don't think you're alone in that lack of knowledge or the feeling on all of this. But we need to proceed because obviously this is something that's very real to a lot of people, and it gets us on board with this, and it may involve some tweaking later on, but we need to get started. So if you all use your imagination as to, and also knowledge as to what is before us, that would be good. Commissioner Eggenberger?
Alan is here, I don't know. Did you just
Oh,
pick him up or-
I did,
Which is fine. I mean, Alan, he doesn't need to.
We're gonna have some
Alan moves to
issues.
the other side of the table. and he
if Alan
gets
was
forgotten.
taller, I'd have seen him. But,
No, I completely agree with you. I think it's more complete than what we currently have. I don't know enough about these, it changes so fast, this technology, so, I think you guys did a very good job.
now, Commissioner Eggenberger.
Okay, now this may, do you have any pictures? Could you send us just some pictures? Because I can
Sure.
I can read these things you have in mind, but if you could send just, and then it would help just to understand when you're talking about
Sure.
something, what it really would look like. Because I'm the same thing, I'm reading this thinking, well, I don't know what this stuff is.
Yeah, we can do that. And like I noted, if we set a public hearing tonight, we're not going to gain any time. So we could, after our discussion, we can postpone this to the December meeting, and then we set the public hearing. It would happen in January either way, and then we can have some pictures at the December meeting, so that can address your question there, as well as any other questions we've got from the table.
Or
Not-
non-intelligent ones.
Maybe not, yeah,
Maybe you
maybe
could ask some
not.
stupid ones, too. We're okay.
All right, Commissioner Zuber, any comments or concerns?
So based on the current interpretations, you can't put solar panels on the front of your home? The
Correct.
front roof? Yeah, which is silly, because sometimes that's the best orientation, so,
The sun is.
yeah, that's where the sun is.
Yeah, and the street I live on the south side, and if all my neighbors on the north side had panels on their roof facing the street, personally, I don't have a problem with that. That's kind of innocuous by this point, because a lot of people have them,
Right.
in other
Yeah,
communities.
To me, they're beautiful because they're generating power without fossil fuels, so. Anyway, I have absolutely no problem with this. I think it's a good idea.
All right, my take on all of this is, we need to just, like you're getting into the pool, you need to just dive in there, because if you just dip a foot in there and a foot in there and so on and so forth, it takes you a long time to get, we have to deal with this. This is very real. I'm lucky in the fact that we did deal with this as a planning commission in a way with the wind turbine issue. And in fact, I'm really surprised that we got into the turbine issue prior to getting now into the solar thing, because the solar one has been out there for a long time. But I do know that homeowners associations have had to deal with that front of the house situation many times. There's been a lot of disputes and legal stuff that's gone on. So I'm glad we're dealing with this now. Orientation is key, obviously, just like with, the dishes. That was a big thing, too. And is it fair to tell one resident, yes, you can, and another one, no, you can't, simply because their orientations are different of their homes? So I'm glad we're getting into some of this detail. The idea of only front of the home being excluded, I think is outdated too, in the sense that we've also had a lot of time to get used to the idea of solar panels. We've all seen them, we drive different places, we've seen the farms, we've seen them on houses, so I think the public is adjusting to the idea of this. And so looking out your front window and seeing solar panels on your neighbor's house across the street on the front of their house is not as problemsome as it was 10 years ago. So, I mean, those things are going to change. The other thing that I would bring to you is that ultimately, because of, we are a capitalist society, we're going to have a lot of ingenuity that takes place at combining the wind turbine idea along with solar. So I know right now we've separated, the two things, but ultimately we may deal with detail that, has to deal with both. With different things happening. So I think we have to be a little bit, I know we need to be specific when it comes to an ordinance amendment, but we need to be fluid in the sense that things are going to change, as we go forward with this. The only thing that you've written in here that I really have an objection to right now, and this is right now, is under height, roof-mounted and wall-mounted solar energy systems. Roof-mounted systems shall not extend more than 1 foot above the roof line. Can I ask, how did that 1 foot get put in there? Because I could make a case for, well, geez, why should it extend above the roof line? If we're concerned with appearances, let's keep it at the roof line, the top of the roof line and below. Just because, rather than looking out and seeing a whole bunch of solar panels through your neighborhood, let's at least try to hide some of it. Was there a reason for the 1 foot?
Yeah, that's a fairly common restriction in a lot of solar ordinances, and some of the main objectives with that is both regarding the tilt and having it a similar slope as the primary roof slope. So if your roof is a certain slope and you have a solar panel there, there's the panel, there's the equipment. Naturally, even if it's flat against the roof, it's going to come up a number of inches, but not more than a foot if it were flat against the roof, keeping the same angle. But it would allow a little bit of room so that there could be a little bit of tilt with that panel, but not so much tilt as to protrude more than a foot from that roof.
Okay, all right, I get that. Okay, and then there was just a typo in there. You got the word extent, and I think it probably means to say extend instead of extent, a minor detail.
Where was that one?
That was in that same paragraph under height. Says
Got it.
says it may extend up to 4 feet, and I think you mean extend. No biggie. The other thing. So storage is going to be key. Also with all of this, I understand that DTE is already working on things where you can basically store up a lot of your solar energy, and even to the point where DTE buys it from you, buys the energy from you. I don't know how all this works, okay? I'm not a techie person, but it's interesting, and I know other people are going to get involved in this, so we need to have verbiage that deals with that. So the battery situation, the storage situation, needs to be dealt with in a way that's pleasing to our homeowners associations, because it sounds like there's going to be need for an outside unit next to the house or near the house. Those are kinds of things that homeowners association boards are going to have to deal with in terms of aesthetics and positioning and all those kinds of things. So I hope that, we keep the homeowners associations involved. In fact, I would like to see it added in here somewhere that homeowners association, HOA written approval documents, where applicable in residential uses, is necessary. I know I think we've been getting away from the necessity of having the homeowners association get involved in and changes to property, and we need to bring that back, because that's what keeps your neighborhood strong and in good shape. This is a suggestion that I can make to that. Other than that, I got no problems going forward with what you have here. Commissioner Weber?
I too, I can echo what Commissioner Watkins was saying. I personally need to learn more about this technology. I know just enough to be dangerous, probably. And what I read sounds good. My biggest concern was that we don't get too restrictive. in allowing this, because this is gonna grow. This isn't gonna go away, at least I don't believe it is. And being in a high-tech industry that I'm in, things change quickly. I gotta believe too that the technology of this will change and improve. Aesthetics will probably improve. Size of panels and such will probably change. Thickness and height of them will probably change. Any number, how they store the batteries, all that sort of thing. So I think we do need to be able to adapt with that quickly and just not make the ordinance so restrictive that it makes every time something like this changes that it's next to impossible to accomplish or just too burdensome. But other than that, I'm on board with it. I also agree with Commissioner Eggenberger that just seeing some examples of what you're seeing here in the township that kind of would cause this would be great. I mean, we've all seen solar panels on people's homes, but seeing some of the specific examples that you're dealing with might help us put the two things together and get a better understanding on it.
Sure.
Commissioner Foster?
Thank you. So I'm very happy that we're doing this. I wish there was a version of this that we were amending and not just having this be the first time that we're doing this, because I feel like solar has been around for a minute. So it's weird to me that we're doing this, but I'm very happy that we're doing it. I would say that I agree with Commissioner Watkins, Eigenberger, and Weber that I do not know as much about the different types of solar technology. So I think having pictures or more information would be helpful when we are called to vote on this in January. In addition, I think probably the Township Board could use some of that education as well for when they vote on this. But I also agree with Commissioner Weber that I hope that whatever we come up with isn't too restrictive, because as he mentioned, the technology is going to change, and as we're seeing, technology is changing very rapidly.
Commissioner Singh?
Yeah, I think I agree with almost everybody you guys have said. Not too restrictive. I would say actually we should encourage it to make it much, much easier for these things to be installed. Michigan, I think, is behind many other states who have grown too much in solar panels and installations. And I know as a country, we are behind many other countries where we are not using it as much as the other countries are using it. So I think we should encourage it. We should make it easier, give as much information as possible to the public as we can. So, and DTE Energy, I know you took, Mr. Chairman, you said that they buy it back, but they make it so tough that they put so many charges on buying it back that you get just pennies back. I mean, it doesn't make sense actually to spend all that money on those batteries to store that and then send it back. It doesn't make sense. Many other states have much better provisions where it makes sense. So I think I don't know, as a city we can do anything about it, but we definitely as a state need to do a lot on it.
I don't know much about it myself. I just heard rumors and stories and so on and so forth, and I just know that this is going to be foremost on some people's thoughts, and so we need to be able to deal with that while keeping, the aesthetics of the community, there. I don't want to be restrictive either. However, you don't want something to get outlandish in the way of design and implementation at the same time. So I'm going to recommend this, and you brought it up yourself. This might be something that, as you can see here, we need to put off for another month. It's just for education purposes. And, maybe you can supply the commission with some more physical material that helps us understand what we're up against and what's before us on this. And then when we put our heads together, we can then be a little bit more adaptable. So I would say I know you want to set a public hearing for this, but I would say that we need to go through that process first, a little bit more of an educational process for the board, in order, and for for the trustees even, for us to even, get into it realistically. Because right now, I assume that you've gleaned from other areas, as you've said, we don't know if all of those details are going to be, right for us. And I think before we go forward with that, I think, let's give us a chance to have some real input, from an educated standpoint.
Yeah, we'll send those types of materials out. We have them in some form or another, whether it's a building permit application that has been deferred. And I know there are solar installation companies that we've communicated with to let them know, because a lot of times if they don't get a building permit and then they call us and want to know why. And so what I've told them is that it is something that we are working on. There's nobody who's averse to having solar panels, but amending an ordinance takes time, but it is something that, we're making a priority. One item I did want to mention is that there's a fairly recent model ordinance for the state that came from, I think it was from U of M, has a sustainability center, and they have a model solar energy ordinance. And that model ordinance, I will say, is less intense than the model ordinances 15 years ago. The model ordinances 15 years ago dealt with a whole host of issues that sounded important at the time, but with newer technology and proven technology of solar energy systems have just kind of fallen by the wayside as being either over-regulatory or not applicable. So those ordinances over time have only gotten shorter. And we'll send you the model ordinance that U of M has, because that model ordinance also has provisions and practices for the utility scale solar panels. So if that's something we entertain in the future, that's a good start.
I know this is something that's way outlandish someplace, but is it possible maybe you even get, let's say, a university-type person who's involved in the teaching and whatnot of solar energy and whatnot, and knows some of the practices going on today? I know it's difficult to get a private business involved because obviously there's a conflict of interest there. But if you were to get it from a university standpoint, it would help to educate us, somebody to come in and just tell us what we're up against in terms of this. Is that maybe feasible? Commissioner Eggenberger, you have some
Well,
comment?
I understand wanting to have some time to educate ourselves, but I think when Patrick suggested that we have the public in January, I think is a good idea. I don't think we want to wait on this. I think that's what everybody's talked about. There's a need to get this set and ready for everyone to use. And I think that you bring more information to us in December. I think it's set. If we set the public hearing for January, I think that's appropriate. I don't think we would want to postpone it.
Any other comments on that, in that regard?
I agree with Commissioner Eichenberger.
Me too.
Yeah, me too.
All right,
I think
all right,
there's, it's pretty straightforward. And my understanding is that the battery storage can be inside, and that the net metering that we used to have is just done through the meter. It doesn't, the batteries don't have to be visible or outside for that.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah, see,
I
again,
don't know the latest stuff, but
And that's another point, is battery technology has gotten a lot better over the last
Has.
15 years too, so.
incredibly much better.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
in that case, it sounds like the commission is pretty much on board with proceeding and setting a public hearing date.
So I move to set the public hearing for the proposed amendment to Section 2.03I of the zoning ordinance to include provisions for solar energy systems as provided for in the attached ordinance proposal.
So moved.
All right, we've got a motion on the floor by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Eggenberger. Any further discussion on that motion? Commissioner Zuber, would you call the vote, please?
Certainly. Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Commissioner Okun?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
That's a yes from me as well. Okay, so let's move on to zoning ordinance text amendment concerning fast food restaurants. Patrick, could you tell us more detail?
Sure, thank you. So one of the items that we had noted, sometimes in administering the zoning ordinance, we find things there that They're there for, some are there for good reasons, others where it's unusual, we look through the history to see what the intent was. And some of it's going back 20, 30 years sometimes to see why things are put in the way that they are. Sometimes it's for our own use, sometimes an applicant wants to know. And in this particular case, what we have is, we've got in the C2 zoning, or the C2 district in the ordinance, it allows for fast food and drive-through restaurants. And that's in the C2, the community commercial, where it explicitly says fast food and drive-through restaurants. However, in the C3 district, which is supposed to be a more intense district, and the C4 district, which is the interchange, probably our most intense commercial district from a vehicle standpoint, they just note fast food restaurants as special land uses and omit the language about drive-throughs. And there are differences in the definition in the zoning ordinance about the difference between a fast food restaurant and a drive-through restaurant. Something can be fast food, but not necessarily a drive-through. And in looking at some of the areas of the zoning ordinance in terms of what the intent was, the existing definitions of fast food restaurant and drive-through restaurant have been in the zoning ordinance since 1990. We believe at that time there was an error made when it was adopted that excluded drive-through restaurants from the C3 and C4 districts because it doesn't make sense to have a drive-through restaurant in our C2 district that is far away from the interchanges, more of a community commercial, a little bit more on the local end, and then not have drive-through restaurants in your most intense commercial districts that are vehicle dominated. So we have a few reasons for why we think it was an error. The first is that, as we noted, the C3 and the C4 districts are more intense auto-oriented districts than the C2 district. So it would be contradictory to allow drive-through restaurants in the C2 district while prohibiting them in the C3 and C4 districts. The second reason is that in Article 4 of the zoning ordinance, the parking standards for fast food restaurants and drive-through restaurants, they both state that they require 10 stacking spaces. So it's regulated as if fast food restaurants and drive-through restaurants were hand in hand. The third reason is that in Article 6A of the zoning ordinance, which is the article on the sign standards, the sign standards for fast food restaurants and drive-through restaurants include provisions for the menu ordering sign. And they're used synonymously for drive-through and fast food as those regulations apply. And finally, the fourth reason is probably the most important, is that there have been many fast food restaurants in the C3 and C4 district that have been approved with drive-through facilities since 1990. And I think they've been approved as fast food restaurants, and the other provisions of the ordinance just allow the stacking spaces, the menu ordering board, so they've been treated as such, but without that explicit language in the ordinance, it makes it a little bit more difficult to administer. So we believe that the original intent should have been to include drive-through restaurants in Article 17 after the fast food restaurant text, and in Article 18 after the fast food restaurant text for the C3 district and C4 districts respectively. So our recommendation for the Planning Commission is to set a public hearing for the proposed amendments to the sections in Article 17 and Article 18 of the zoning ordinance to include drive-through restaurants, along with the existing fast food restaurant text. And in article, or section, or rather page 2 of our staff report, it shows the areas in underline that would be added, and it would just be 3 words in each one that just say those 3 words of "and drive-through" between the word fast food and restaurants, just to include them hand in hand, just like the C2 district does. So that concludes our report on that, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Let's start down with Mr. Singh. Commissioner Singh, do you have any comments or concerns?
Just one, does it have anything to do with Chick-fil-A?
No, none.
Yeah, no questions.
Commissioner Foster.
This made me think of a question, not 100% related, but I noticed that this doesn't include anything about parking. And I think a lot of, like, the drive-through restaurants that primarily do drive-throughs, they have parking spaces that are basically just land being wasted. And so I just wondered if there's any plan to address parking in some of these facilities.
We definitely want to, on a longer-term basis, to address the parking standards for fast food restaurants as well as a whole host of other uses. And there's a lot of strategies that are out there that we can use to approach that. Some communities have altogether gotten rid of all parking minimums, and it's mostly a demand-based, owner-based model. Some of them are much more lenient, that allows more flexibility or make it more difficult to propose more spaces than the minimum required, and the minimums being much lower than what we have here. Our zoning ordinance was last rewritten in 1990, and things have changed since 1990. And one of the major amendments that we want to look at going forward with the zoning ordinance is to try to minimize those parking demands. And as applications come before the Planning Commission, we try to, each and every time, to reduce that demand where we can. There's a provision in the ordinance that does allow the Planning Commission to modify it, but because it's based on the Planning Commission on a case-by-case basis, applicants don't always know until they're at the Planning Commission meeting if they're going to get their parking reduction. So that's something that we want to make easier in the code, at least so that there's more predictability from the applicant standpoint in terms of what to propose. I will say that with what the Planning Commission has been doing, it has made it a lot easier for staff to say to applicants that we can point to several types of cases where the Planning Commission has granted parking modifications, so that the Planning Commission's got a track record of, if it can be justified for a parking modification, we show those examples to the applicant and say, look, the Planning Commission is more than willing to lower parking where it can be justified. So in the interim, that has worked, but long-term, like with a lot of our other ordinance amendments, the long-term remedy is to amend the ordinance and do a long-term fix.
Commissioner Weber?
I don't have any questions.
No questions? The one that I have would be, because of the pandemic, it was actually instituted another form of getting food from a restaurant to participants, customers, curbside. And it seems to me that that's an entity that may not need to go away simply because of the absence of a pandemic. For some businesses, restaurants that cannot have a drive-through, the next best thing for them, in addition to people walking in and grabbing their items, would be curbside. It seems to me we should deal with that in terms of an actual entity for these businesses as an option. It's just a thought that I had, in terms of, this has been introduced, and it seems to me it shouldn't go away as an option.
Yeah, and some restaurants, both fast food and standard restaurants, have included new signage on dedicated parking spaces to dedicate it only for carry out for DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever it is. And there's nothing in the ordinance that prohibits a parking space from being designated for another purpose, as long as it's a parking space. So that's something that restaurants have been able to do administratively, as long as it's not severely underparked, where they'll just dedicate so many parking spaces, put up signage that it's curbside pickup only, and that fits within the ordinance now, because there's really nothing in the ordinance that prohibits it. But long-term, we may look at language that addresses that specifically, just so that years later, it doesn't have to be interpreted, it's just part of our code.
Zuber?
I have no questions or concerns.
Commissioner Eggenberger?
I also have no questions or concerns, don't need pictures on this one, I'm good to go.
Would you like a microphone?
Oh, well, I could have that.
bring the whole
I think
bottle of
we
water.
could probably handle this one in December.
January. We're too soon for
Yeah, we're too
December.
soon for this.
Oh, we can't get it on the, we can't
For
get it on the
public hearings.
calendar. Oh, that was the issue. All right, well,
Taking my mic back.
rightly so.
Commissioner Okan?
I'm good, thank you.
Commissioner Watkins?
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Motion coming.
I move to set the public hearing for the proposed amendment to Section 17.02B8 and Section 18.02B2 of the zoning ordinance to include drive-through restaurants with fast food restaurants as a special land use in the C3 and C4 zoning districts as provided for in the attached ordinance proposal.
All right, I've got a motion on the floor by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Singh. Any further discussion on that motion? Commissioner Zuber, would you call the vote on that, please?
For Commissioner Eggenberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Okun,
Yes.
Commissioner Singh.
Yes.
Commissioner, wait till I call your name, okay? Wait till I get it out. Commissioner Watkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Weber.
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
That's a yes from me. All right, so, are we talking about January for that one, too?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so our next agenda item is an amendment for zoning ordinance text dealing with fences, walls, and, it says borders. Is that right? Oh, okay, all right. Patrick, could you give us more detail, please?
Sure. This is one that is a carryover from the October Planning Commission meeting, and we anticipate that it will continue to be a carryover item as we get through the ordinance. The fence, wall, and border part of the ordinance, it's very difficult, it's very complex. It's something that the Zoning Board of Appeals has received a number of variance requests from, and a lot of those variance requests are for corner lot fences where corner lots, they have two front yards, one on each street side, and in many cases, owners want to have a fence that goes into one of those two front yards. The emphasis in the staff report this evening deals with those corner lots that have one side on a major road like Sheldon or Cherry Hill or Morton Taylor, where it's the entrance to a subdivision for the most part, and the other corner, other front yard is the entrance itself, and the entrance where someone takes their driveway. Off and then on. Better?
Radioactive.
Yeah. Phone is here, I bet.
Or put your phone back, that's worse.
That's worse? Okay. Well, it just means I'll have to talk less. So the issues that we emphasize in our staff report for the corner fences are those subdivision entrances where they have a front yard off of a major road, where they don't have their driveway, they don't have their address, it's just the subdivision entrance. And before we had our current regulations require a 50-foot buffer in the front yard that's common open space. So a new site condo comes in or a new subdivision comes in along the major road, they have to have a 50-foot buffer. But before we had that requirement, they used to take those owner yards all the way up to the right-of-way. So what we ended up having is a lot of these corner lot front yards at subdivision entrances where people would have the house, they would see that their secondary front yard is along a major road, and as traffic gets busier, people want to put up fences, which is an understandable thing to do, but our ordinance doesn't allow fences in front yard setbacks, so we get a lot of variance requests for those areas. Those are probably on the easier end to deal with than corner fences within a development where you've got two residential streets on either side, and some of the other corner lot fences where they want to take it even closer to the front of the house. So in the main corner fence details that we've included in our report, and all these pictures that are in our report, are corners of major subdivisions where one side is the major road like Sheldon or Morton Taylor or Cherry Hill, and the other is the interior subdivision street, so that we can start looking at those to see which provisions we want to use going forward. And then those other corner lots that I mentioned would be easier to have future discussions on once we start to address those. And it doesn't mean that we're going to come to any kind of resolution tonight on some of these major roads, because I'm sure there's probably a lot of questions, a lot of discussion there. But most of it revolves around those corner lot houses. But in our staff report here, we do summarize some other proposed changes that we have in the draft ordinance. First, there are some changes to definitions in section 1.03 of the zoning ordinance. This initial proposal is to propose taking the fence ordinance language from the general fence ordinance, which is not currently in the zoning ordinance, and moving those regulations into the zoning ordinance, because that's usually the first place people go if they want to see what the zoning rules are on what they can build. So for now, and this can change in the future, but for now, we're recommending taking the fence standards and moving them back into the zoning ordinance. And one of the things in doing that, we noticed that there's a lot of redundancy between the language and the definitions of the zoning ordinance and the fence ordinance. So in the strike-through version of the ordinance itself, there's a lot of definition text that's being removed because a lot of this is already covered in the general zoning ordinance. So some of it's redundant, some of it conflicts slightly. So we've got a couple different definitions of how things are applied depending on which ordinance that we're looking at. So with definitions, it's definitely something that would be streamlined if it's put in the zoning ordinance. One of the next items is a requirement to have a survey for a fence permit. And the building division may already require that in terms of administering the fence ordinance, which they would be able to do to prove that something is located where it says it is on the permit application. But it's something we want to have in the ordinance itself, just so that it's very explicit. Some of it is aesthetic by prohibiting mesh, vinyl slats, and other similar material that's attached to a fence. Once in a while, we get fence inquiries when somebody wants to do a chain link fence, but they want to put mesh on it. And in a residential area, that doesn't work because part of it is we want to include aesthetic standards, and there are some aesthetic standards in the ordinance, but other parts of the ordinance state that it has to be durable material that would last at least 10 years. And there's not really vinyl slats and mesh that meet that standard. So we've been able to keep that out of residential areas particularly, but we want to have some explicit language there. Another item at the top of page 2 of 11 of our staff report is currently, if someone builds a fence that's within 3 feet of a lot line, they have to have their neighbor's permission. They have to have a notarized affidavit. There are some communities that require that. Most don't, but there are some that do. Canton's not the only one. And that's something where we wanted to consider whether we wanted to keep the language or if we wanted to change it to something else. And our proposal at this time is if we want to change it, we have some draft text in the ordinance itself. And it would remove the requirement to obtain the neighbor's permission if the fence is within 3 feet of a lot line. And part of that is, in some cases, if the neighbors get along and they sign it, it's no big deal. But if neighbors don't get along and a neighbor refuses to sign, then the remedy is for the neighbor that wants to put the fence near the lot line to come to the Zoning Board of Appeals to pay the application fee just for the privilege of having the fence on their lot, but closer than 3 feet to a lot line. And that could lead to some disparate rules throughout the township if certain neighbors don't consent. So our proposed text is to require a survey to verify that the fence is entirely on the owner's property. And that way it would make any disputes over the survey to be more of a civil matter. That's something we would probably want to have more discussion on as well. Another item that we have trouble with the fence ordinance is that right now, 6-foot fence is allowed in the rear yard of a property. And the fence can only extend as far forward as the rear of the home of the owner or the rear of the neighboring home. So what we've seen there is that if you have a neighbor and the rear of their house is behind your own house, you can only do a 6-foot fence up to your neighbor's corner. And then when you go forward of your neighbor's corner, it can only be a 4-foot max height. So in some cases, a neighbor will have a rear yard, but they can only have a 4-foot fence in certain areas because they can only take a 6-foot high fence up to their neighbor's rear corner. And so if someone has a 6-foot fence in their rear yard, or they're thinking about putting a fence, but then their neighbor puts a big rear yard addition, that really limits the areas where someone can have a 6-foot high fence, and that's led to a lot of variance requests. And so we would recommend allowing that 6-foot high fence to be in the rear yard of the property regardless of where your neighbors are. As long as you're in your own rear yard, it's fine. That's how we see it, and that's generally a variance that the Zoning Board of Appeals has granted. Another item is that currently we don't have any changes proposed to the maximum height of a fence in a side yard. If a fence is in the side yard of a property, the maximum height is 4 feet. In some cases, property owners have wanted to have a 6-foot-high fence in their side yard, and that can have different implications. If there were to be a 6-foot fence in the side yard, but go all the way to the front of the house, that could make the property have a fortress-like appearance. That may not look very good if everyone has 6-foot fences that go up to the front line of their house. So that's something that I'm not sure that we would want to allow. But to have some kind of a 6-foot fence in the side yard that goes, some people want to go a little bit farther into their side yard from the rear because they want to enclose a back door or some mechanical equipment, or, you know, some place to do some minor storage of garbage cans, and they just want a little bit more privacy. And sometimes the Zoning Board of Appeals gets applications like that. So that is something we may want to consider. And the example that we put was to allow a 6-foot fence, but to be a certain distance from the front of the house, such as 20 feet. But that's just an example that we put out there, and we're happy to discuss that in more detail and take questions, because these are some wholesale things that we're looking at in the fence ordinance. And then the last thing is, we had noted of allowing certain fences to be constructed in the front yard of corner lots along major roads. And this list could continue on in future months as we uncover more issues, especially with corner lot fences, as well as questions that come up here from the Planning Commission. So this is kind of the next step in what I think will be a lot more steps in the process of looking at our fence ordinance and getting questions, bringing more material, and maybe doing some additional visual preference items in the future. So I'll stop there and take any questions or comments that you've got so far.
All right, thank you, Patrick. So what we're dealing with this one is not necessarily a January public hearing. It's more or less a study as to going forward in different applications, right?
That's correct. I think we're probably a few months away from setting a public hearing, just based on the number of issues that we have to discuss here. And ultimately, whatever is recommended from the Planning Commission would be going to the board. So once we eventually come up with something that the Planning Commission's in general agreement on, we may want to reach out to the board about maybe a study session to talk about what's coming up, because I'm sure the board may have a lot of questions about it as well.
Commissioner Watkins, do you have any questions on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions at this time. I do want to publicly, for the record, just to indicate, Patrick, and notwithstanding what we've done here, nice work. HOA bylaws and rules supersede all of the ordinances that would be amended and/or changed with respect to fences. Is that right? Is that a true statement, or?
That is true. A lot of HOAs don't allow fences. So a lot of that is handled, any kind of disputes of whether to have a fence, where to put a fence. A lot of that's done at the HOA level, especially a lot of our newer HOAs. They'll put in the bylaws that fences are prohibited. So a lot of that gets handled at that private level. So that's correct. Regardless of what we do here, if an HOA prevents fences, then this would be a moot point for those associations.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Ogun.
My only comment is your third bullet point with regards to dropping to a 4-foot fence versus a 6 to make it not look like a fortress. I don't think adding 2 feet from 4 to 6 makes it look like a fortress. But one thing that does do when you reduce from 6 to 4, it makes a privacy fence not private anymore. I think this is just my opinion, but when the pandemic hit, that a lot of people started hanging out outside a lot more, hanging out a lot more in their backyard. And I think people are enjoying that, and they like that privacy. Also, some of these that would be affected are near a little bit more noisier roads, and I think a 6-foot fence would help that noise. So I honestly don't see a difference. I'd like to see us keep the 6-foot allowance. That's all I got. Thank you.
Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yeah, I'm trying to read this second one where it sounds like you're okay with a 6-foot fence in the side yard as long as it doesn't go too far to the front?
Yeah, if it was, that's a more difficult one to deal with, because that one is where there's a side yard where you've got 2 houses next to each other, and that fence comes forward of that rear corner. And so the current fence ordinance doesn't allow the 6-foot fence in the rear yard, and it's been that way for probably a few decades now. So any kind of change, I'm sensitive to, but I don't necessarily have a major issue if it were to come a little bit farther from the rear of the house, because we do hear cases of people that just, have a little bit of privacy in that side yard farther back from the house, so that if you're looking from the road, you may notice that they have a 6-foot fence that goes farther forward than the rear of the house, but not so far forward that it overpowers the facade of the house. So, I mean, I hear a lot from homeowners that say that they wish they just had a little bit more area in the back, and it's different from homeowner to homeowner, so I can't really speak for all. Some of them want to come 10 feet forward or half the distance forward, something like that. Rarely do we hear from someone who wants to go all the way forward to the front of the house. Usually it's just, something where they can have a little bit more private storage.
Or that man door from the side of their garage is a lot of times what we see.
Yeah, we saw one of those a month or two ago at ZPA.
But right now, the ordinance is, as soon as you hit that neighbor's back structure, it has to drop down to a 4-foot.
And at a future meeting, we can take some pictures in the community of people that have 6-foot fences in the side yard that they probably predate the ordinance, because these fences can last a while, and maybe just have a visual of what it looks like when it's closer to the front of the house, just to, and both give you the aerial, the top-down view, and then the street view, just to kind of see what those look like.
Questions? Commissioner Zuber?
I'm going to need to delve into this a little bit deeper and more to understand exactly what we're talking about, but I think we're going in the right direction.
The only concerns I have, I have a question first. So our current ordinance allows for, if a fence is allowed, up to a certain point of the side of the house, right? Is it halfway, or is it, what's the rule in terms of how far forward can they come with the fence under current ordinance?
Right now, in the current ordinance, if they go, starting from the rear lot line going to the front, they can have a 6-foot fence, and then going frontward, that 6-foot fence has to stop at either the rear of the owner's building or the rear of their neighbor's buildings, whichever happens first. And then once it hits that point, then it has to go down to a 4-foot high fence.
And that can be carried as far forward as how far?
The front yard setback line. So in most cases, that'll be the front building line of the house. So they can, if there are no HOA restrictions, somebody can have a 4-foot fence that goes to the front yard setback.
So they can match the line, the front line of the house with the part that goes to the house, in other words. That not, because I've seen photos here, I think you included some photos here showing a fence going, and I don't care whether it's 6 or 4 feet, but it goes about halfway or, somewhere in there. Is that just owner's designation, or was there an ordinance restriction on that?
That I don't know. We would have to look to see at what point the ordinance ever allowed them to go farther forward with a 6-foot high fence in the side yard. And it could have been that the owners may have gotten a variance several years ago, or they may have otherwise been able to obtain a permit for it.
Otherwise, they would have been restricted to the rear, going up as far as the rear of the house?
Yeah, if it was a 6-foot fence.
Okay, so then the other question I have is, there have been requests to have front yard fences. Are we talking about a fence that surrounds the entire front yard, or just the side bordering the main street?
Well, there have been variance requests for a larger area of a front yard with a corner lot fence. Where we recommend starting is at those areas where it's the corner of a major street. I think those are the ones that cause us the largest number of variance requests, where people want they want the 6-foot fence so bad in that area, they're willing to apply for a variance to get it, just because that area along a major street where they want more privacy. So that's the biggest issue that we're dealing with right now with corner fences, and I understand the desire to have that. If someone's at the corner of, say, Warren Road and a subdivision, and having a 6-foot-high fence in that front yard, if it's the rear of the house where it goes from, say, the rear corner all the way to that rear lot line, that's probably the easiest one to look at and say, that's easy to kind of amend the ordinance and say that's the least impactful, because as you drive into the subdivision, there's not a fence in the side of your house or in front of your house. That fence is still in the back of the house. The question is, would we want such a fence, like a 6-foot-high fence, to extend farther toward the front of the house near the entrance of a subdivision? We do get some variance requests. Some stop at the rear corner of the house, others want to go farther forward. There's a mix of different visual examples here in the packet. In terms of,
So in the cases of corner lots bordering a main thoroughfare, a main street, okay, so if we had requests going with a front yard fence going up to, let's say, the sidewalk, and stopping there, or continuing and just, surrounding the entire front yard, that's what I'm getting at. Are we getting entire front yard requests?
some people have made that request. There are some fences in the township that are enclosed like that right now, where they enclose not just along the major road, but they make the turn into the sub and they enclose that front yard adjacent to that subdivision street. And those are some of the biggest and most impactful issues that we deal with in terms of when someone wants to tear down the fence and rebuild it. Currently, the ordinance states that any change to the fence has to be in conformity with the ordinance. So we have a lot of requests from people that want to rebuild their fences the way that they are, but the way that they are these 6-foot fences that make the entire turn around the entrance and kind of wall off that entrance corner to the subdivision where it's, the ordinance doesn't allow the front yard setback location of the fence, but then the owner is trying to either rebuild what they have or find out from the ZBA if a variance would be granted for that. And they come in a little bit different because if we drive down the roads, and I promise you, as you go down those major roads, now that we're working on this, you're going to start to notice a lot of these fences in the front yards and say, oh, I remember seeing that, or I'm going to remember that for a future planning commission meeting. And there are a lot that are, the ones that where you enter the sub and it's a 6-foot fence all around, those are probably the most impactful. First, because they're in the clear vision zone, that 25-foot triangular area at the entrance of the sub, where if you're walking down the sidewalk of a major road, you can't see around a corner. So if you're on a bike or in a
Right,
stroller, you're not going to see that. So visibility, from a public safety standpoint, that's number one, where if there was
Should
something
taper
there,
down.
we'd want it lowered or outside of that 25-foot area. And then beyond that, it's more aesthetic of, if you're driving down and you look at the entrance to the sub, there's certain elements of the sub that you generally want to see that, you don't necessarily want a fence to wall off. But those are things that we can also provide visual examples of certain
The
subs
reason
that
I
have
asked
that.
about the entire yard is because I thoroughly object to enclosing the entire front yard. But I do approve of the idea, if you live along a thoroughfare that is very busy, I agree that having a fence that runs along that side of your yard up to, let's say, the sidewalk, it should be allowed, but it should taper, as you said, taper down a little bit because of, the protection, just the idea that you can't see around that corner. It's just, for a safety's sake, I think that's the best thing to do. That's just my little quirk. And then one little other thing that I would like to add, and that's not true for everybody, fences can do some wonderful things in terms of privacy, but they also can bring a certain level of blight to a neighborhood because people know, okay, nobody can see the junk I've I've put in here, except maybe my neighbor from the second-story window that I've lined up along the fence. When you didn't have a fence, that kind of thing couldn't be hidden except by bushes or something. But when you have a privacy fence, some people tend to use those as shields of just junk. And I don't know how we combat that, but it leads to rats, it leads to just a total blight situation in a community. And I would like to find a way to get around that as well. So, Commissioner Weber.
I don't really have anything to add. I do agree that the whole fence issue is somewhat convoluted, but I understand you have so many different property variations in the township. It's probably hard to come up with a consistent ordinance that addresses.
Definitely not one size fits all.
That addresses every situation. But we do need to clean it up. So I don't, all the comments have been made by the commission, so I don't really have anything to add. I would disagree a little bit with Commissioner Okan about privacy fences. I do think to me, there is a big difference between a 6-foot fence and a 4-foot fence, especially when you are talking about a solid fence. It's, whether you want to see your neighbors or not, or say hi to the neighboring dog or whatever, I think it is a difference. I'm not opposed to them. I just think the aesthetics and the reality of them are two different things.
I think you're in agreement, because weren't you saying that the 6-foot fence gives you privacy where the 4-foot fence doesn't?
Correct.
No, but he's saying that there's not much difference between a 4-foot and a 6-foot fence, and I don't agree. I
Well,
mean, 6-foot fence, that's about as tall as all of us here.
Perfect.
Well, I mean, I guess you don't like your neighbors, so I mean, that's.
Well, I
fine.
mean, some neighbors are allowed to grow things in their backyard now that they weren't many years ago, so.
Understood. I'm not saying there's not a purpose for them. I just don't, I think there is, it depends on this, and again, it depends on the situation.
Commissioner Foster, any comments, concerns? This is, obviously Patrick's taking all of this stuff down, and this is going to be a thing in progress that we work on. Commissioner Foster?
I don't have much to add, just that I agree with Commissioner Weber. There are about as many situations as you can think of in regards to fencing, and I don't know that we will, I think we will do our best to come up with a solution that's equitable and broad for the folks in the township, but a lot of it, so much of the township is covered by HOAs that, for a lot of folks, they will not feel the impact of this ordinance, and so that's something to consider as well.
Just kind of piggyback onto that, is it safe to say, Patrick, that with the HOAs, I mean, I live in Pickwick Village, so we have an HOA, but we allow fences. Is it safe to say that most of the HOAs that are prohibiting fences are more in the western, newer developed half of the township versus the eastern half?
Yeah, that's,
Can you make
that's,
that generalization?
yeah, that's correct. More of the newer ones, some of them outright prohibit them. Some of the ones that are maybe in the 70s and 80s are more of having regulations there, but generally allowing them.
I will say this for the record, it's my understanding, and I don't know this for fact from my own personal experience, but I have heard that the township no longer requires HOA approval for things like fences and whatnot in order to get permits. I would urge the township to reinstitute that rule from building and inspection, that you have to get your HOA approval for things like this, because you're weakening the power of the board when the township gives permits and the resident decides, I'll just skip the board, I skipped my HOA, I'm just going to go ahead and get this done. What are they going to do, sue me? I think this is something that's very important to the township. That's just my point of view. Commissioner Singh?
Nothing more to add.
Nothing?
Thank you.
Okay. That's enough for now, right?
Yeah, we'll have more at the next meeting.
All right. It's time for our master plan report. Aaron, are you awake?
Hello, everybody. How are you this evening? So we just have a couple of things to update you on for this,
Are these
update.
fun things? Are these fun things to
They're fun
update?
things, always
Because you
fun
always put that
things.
on your notes. I love it.
Fun updates.
Fun updates.
So the community survey that we've been working on, planning staff and consultants have been working on for several weeks into months, is all but finalized. The Master Plan Advisory Board met for the first time last Thursday. It was a wonderful discussion. It was a lot of back and forth, a lot of, what about this, what about this? And, you know, we as staff and as consultants have been looking at this draft text for so long that there were some things that we didn't think about. So the Master Plan Advisory Board was really, really beneficial in that had us look at things in a different way, or, oh, great, we didn't see that, or the reason we didn't do it is this, blah, blah, blah. So it was a really great, great discussion, and we were really grateful for that feedback. So over the weekend, we were working with McKenna. They are implementing some of the changes that we discussed. We're meeting again tomorrow to kind of finalize some of the language, and so we're hoping to have that survey out to the public later this month. The dates of the actual release and how long it's going to be have not been finalized, but it will be up for over a month. It will be updated in the December Focus newsletter, so any member of the public, you can go to the website. It'll be available on the website, and also hard copies will be made available upon request. So if you call our office or if you email me and you want a hard copy, I can facilitate and get that to you. Just going back, the Master Plan Advisory Board met, so we had a great discussion. The next meeting will be December 8th. They will be meeting in the Arts Room 2 at the Summit. We kind of had to have a little switcheroo for a couple of meetings here in this month, just because the calendar is booked up so quickly here at Township Hall. But all of the meetings in 2023 will be at the lower level of this administration building. Outside of that, we're still just moving forward on some of the other community engagement activities and events that we've got going on, and still working through some of our RRC requirements for certification through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So that includes updates to drafting the Zoning Board of Appeals bylaws. They looked at those last month and provided some feedback, so they'll be looking at those again probably in 2023. And as part of the transparency and streamlining approval processes, as you may recall, we brought some suggestions for updating the site plan ordinance to you last month. So we're still working through some of that, and you'll be seeing some of that language probably next month at the December meeting. So those are the highlights that I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions from the commission in terms of going forward with the master plan process? Nothing? Hearing nothing? No? Thank you very much, Aaron. Appreciate that. With that said, let's see, what else we got to do here? Okay, any public comment? Since you've lasted this entire meeting, anything that you want to say, or, come on up to the podium if you like? No? Okay. All right, with
Not
that.
used to having an audience for our whole meeting. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, welcome.
Oh, okay, welcome, welcome. Yes.
Excellent.
Anything before we adjourn?
Super quick, Mr. Chair, if I can. Street signage. Patrick, I want to put corner of Research Drive and Michigan Avenue eastbound. I noticed there's some signage that used to be there that's not there anymore. It may be developer-owned. It's the sign that indicates Research Drive. There's a development that's happening right there, the Mann's Lumber expansion, and then you've got the entry into the office park. Who controls the signage, and who needs to be contacted to replace that signage that is no longer there?
Sorry. We can reach out to, there should be an association because there's a master deed for that property. We can reach out to the association. I know that Mini Storage Depot is going on the east side along Michigan Avenue. I'm not sure if that's where the sign was removed or if it was from another part of the property, but I'll make a note here to reach out to the association.
Thank you.
I believe, this is just me off the top of my head, I believe the township has a design for those. I know they have it for Ford Road. I thought it extended to Michigan Avenue too, when it came to those corporate parks, in terms of the design of the master sign, you know, and whatnot. But that's something that you may want to look into. I believe it's very similar to the ones that you see along Ford Road. It still applies to Michigan Avenue. I might be wrong on that, but.
Yeah, we do allow for the multi-tenant signs to be on the street. So if there's a shopping center or there's a collection of businesses on a site and there's more than one, we do allow those multi-business, multi-tenant center signs. We do allow them on Michigan Avenue as well. But were you referring to the street sign itself?
Yeah, this was street signage.
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, this
not-
is the
yeah.
street sign, not
Yeah,
the
not
business
commercial
sign.
signage at all,
Okay,
right, yeah.
gotcha, okay. All right, anything else? Dory?
Your
Okay.
concrete's gone.
Oh, yes, I noticed. Yes, thank you. The concrete is gone. It's nice and cleaned up. Nice clean lot now. Back to where it was. Thank you. Anything else from anybody?
I have a question for Patrick. These 4 references only, the Patel brothers in particular, are these for the next meeting?
Yeah, for reference only?
Yeah, these are for reference only. The Patel brothers one in particular, I don't know if that one will yet be ready for the December meeting. That's a proposed Patel Brothers grocery store located at the old Canton Computer site, just south of the Crow's Nest. They're proposing a grocery store there. I don't know if it'll be ready for the December meeting, but they are making progress with their proposed plans. We've looked at them at least one time formally and then informally before they applied. So these are ones that, the MI Express Care, that was just a dumpster enclosure, that was administrative approval, but the other 3 are ones that will eventually be coming to the Planning Commission.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion, Mr. Chair.
Seconded.
All right, all in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.